Grateful to spend a few minutes with you today. The difficulty with, I think, talking about the topic I'm about to talk about, and the space I live in is so abstract and hard to measure, unlike science. I hope to share some things that are valuable. Oh, do I have a controller, by the way? It's not there. Hide and seek. Okay. Well, that's what we're going to talk about, finding things that are lost. So, thank you. Okay, so Pat had asked me to talk about hope, and then we had some discussion about, well, what about hope? What I didn't want to do is to create or to talk about something pedantic and simple. I wanted to be maybe encourage us to think about hope maybe a little differently. So I wanted to talk about hope in the present moment. And I woke up at 3 o'clock literally this morning, Natalie can attest to this, with a nightmare that I always do when I get before this audience, because I love PPMD and I love you, and if I haven't met you, I just don't know you, but I'll fall in love with you because I think all of you are amazing. But my greatest fear was that I would do what this guy did.
Hey! Hey, you! Hey! Hey, wait a second! Hey! Hey! I forgot what I was going to say. All right, never mind. Sorry. Have a nice day anyway. Okay, bye.
I discovered him on TikTok recently and just fell in love with him. He's a philosopher and a comedian who is no stranger to loss. Hope. What is hope? And what does it have to do with the present moment? That's what I want to talk about today. So the story goes, there's two young fish swimming in the water. And as they're swimming, an older, bigger fish swims by and he says, "Hey boys, how's the water?" He swims away. A few minutes later, one of the young fish turns to his friend and says, "What the hell's water?" The point of this little parable is that the most obvious things in our life, the most important realities, are sometimes the hardest things to see. There's a really great talk by a guy named David Foster Wallace. He's since passed, but he gave a commencement address, and he entitled it, "This is Water." And it was a beautiful description. He used this parable to talk about the importance of being aware, self-aware of where our head is. And that's what I want to talk about, our headspace. Are we aware whether our thinking and the way we feel about life, the way we see life, is it healthy and self-aware? Are we in murky water? Are we in entrenched thinking that isn't serving us? Are we in shark-infested, dangerous water? I'm talking about in our minds. Or do we have toxic attitudes or beliefs? We can maybe detect that a little bit by things we might say in our minds like, "Oh, it's just my luck," or "Why do I even try?" Or "Go figure." Things like that. Eckhart Tolle, have you ever heard of him? He's a really brilliant philosopher and writer. I quite enjoy him. I'm going to share several of his quotes today. But he says, rather than being your thoughts and emotions, be the awareness behind them. What an invitation to just take a moment and reflect on where we are in our head. So let's talk for just a minute about the tension between hope for the future and the present moment. How often do we ask ourselves or tell ourselves, when blank happens, then life will begin? Or things like, "I can't wait for," or "Can we just get to the good part?" or skip past the bad part? This is called destination addiction. Can I have my water? So it's a preoccupation with the idea that happiness is somewhere else. Thank you, hon. Speaking of water, I could use a little. So it's a preoccupation with the idea that happiness is somewhere else, that somehow, somewhere, our hope for the future, everything that we want will happen. And I love this. The author, the guy who came up with this, coined this, he's a psychologist. He said, it's being preoccupied with getting through the day rather than being in the day. I've got a point with this as it relates to hope. The present moment. Let's talk about that for just a second. When we look at the past, present, and future, there's a reason we want to do that. We want to be aware of what's coming. We want to look at our past. The past is great because it informs and instructs us. The trouble is, you really can't go back there. It's discontinued. You can't go back to the past, but you can learn from it. The future can inspire and direct us, but it's wholesale, completely unavailable to us. You cannot get to the future without taking the time. How many of us have driven in our cars with our kids? And do you know what I'm going to say? You know what they say? Are we there yet? How long is it going to take? You know, and no matter what we do, if we're driving to Las Vegas or San Diego, you can't get there any faster than it takes to get there. And we're just always constantly in the present moment. So when we're driving, use this as a tiny metaphor, of course we have to use maps and we have to anticipate what's around the corner. That's what we do when we drive. And we also want to be aware of what we just passed. You know, keeping an eye view in the rearview mirror is helpful. But what's most important is what happens really within the close proximity of our cars. And, you know, I used to do a lot of driver safety curriculum years ago. And, you know, you have to be aware of what's going on right around you, but you also have to be super aware of what's going on in your car. But more importantly, we have to be aware of what's going on inside our heads. Distracted driving is dangerous driving. How often do we go through life distracted living, and we're just not in the present moment? So remember this diagram. The present is all we will ever have. Robert Holden, he's the guy that coined the phrase destination addiction. He says, until you give up the idea that happiness is somewhere else, it will never be where you are. So let's talk about hope for a minute. What is hope? What do we hope for? I think it's safe to say most of us would hope for a meaningful, beautiful life, or some derivative of that. But sometimes we confuse comfort for a good life. And I've spent a lot of time with people in really dark, hard spaces, people struggling with existential crisis. And what I've discovered is that if we hope to avoid suffering, it only adds to our suffering. That's just not realistic. Life is hard. Yes, we can do some things to avoid catastrophes or whatnot, but life is difficult. The real troubles in our life are apt to be the things that never crossed your mind. There's a really beautiful quote. Let me tell you a truth. The truth is what is. And what should be is a fantasy. A terrible, terrible lie that somebody gave the people a long time ago. What an interesting thought. I encourage you to sit with this for just a minute, because the only thing that's real is what's happening in our lives right now. And when we fixate on what should be or what we wish was different, it only adds to our suffering. Eckhart Tolle again said, the primary cause of unhappiness is never the situation, but our thoughts about it. How often have we seen some people go through a certain struggle? They're mortified, destroyed on the inside. And then other people sit quietly with it and absorb it and learn from it. There's a difference in how we respond to things and what we get out of them. So let's get weird for a second and talk about Buddhism, okay? Buddhist philosophy. Have you ever heard of near enemies? Anybody hear of that before? It's a really brilliant philosophy that talks about 4 limitless qualities, things that are within us that have no limit to them. Compassion, joy, love, and equanimity. If we cultivate these parts of us, they have no end and they enrich our lives in perpetuity. So I'm going to call that a noble virtue, all those 4 things, because I think there's lots of other things that we would aspire to. And so let's just think about noble virtues and what are near enemies to noble virtues. Here's an example. Okay, a far enemy is something you can see far away. The lion's coming after us, it's going to be pretty easy to know that's trouble. A near enemy is hidden in plain sight. It's camouflaged. It's in disguise. Okay? You might be in a forest and you might pick up a mushroom or some kind of vegetation and eat it, and it could make you very, very sick. It's not clear that it's an enemy. If I were to give you a glass of gross water, that would be what would that be? Be a far enemy. A near enemy, I could give you a glass of what would appear to clean water. But if I'd pulled it out of a river and it had bacteria in it, you'd get very sick. So it'd be hard to discern what that is. So let's talk about this, about hope now in just a minute, and we'll pull this all together. Okay, so near enemies and to noble virtues, okay? So let's do this. What might be the near enemy to compassion? What feels, sounds, and mimics compassion but really isn't? Any thoughts? This is where you chime in. That's okay.
Sincere friends.
What's that?
Fake friends.
Oh, a fake friend.
Not sincere.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I like that. What was another one? Judgment.
Doubt.
What was that?
Doubt.
Doubt. That's good. I probably shouldn't ask because I got really bad hearing, but thank you. So one of the near enemies to compassion is pity. What makes pity different than compassion? Pity separates us from the suffering of others. It's observing it as, oh, I feel really bad for you. I'm so glad I don't have that problem, right? Where compassion is shared. It's a recognition that your suffering is connected to my suffering. And I'll sit with you in your suffering and feel your pain because it's a reflection of my pain. Compassion is powerful. Pity is kind of gross. Let's look at another one. Morality. There's a lot of people that beat the drum of morality, but a near enemy to that might be self-righteousness. We're forgetting that, hey, I'm so great. And anyway, productivity, by the way, right? A noble virtue might be productivity. A near enemy to that would be busyness. And it feels like being productive, but it's not, okay? So what might be a near enemy to hope? Hope is a noble virtue. I would suggest that it's impatience. Even optimistic impatience, hopeful impatience, the desire to run to the next thing, and it might feel like hope, but it's taking us out of the present moment. The idea that when something happens, then something great will happen. So that's the near enemy discussion. Eckhart Tolle said, it's not uncommon for people to spend their whole life waiting to start living. Let's talk now about the present moment. Some things that help us get in the moment quickly. Near miss in a car. Just recently I was driving, listening to some really cool music, and I was going a little fast, and I passed that guy, and I got a ticket. That got me in the moment really fast. My mom used to get mad at me when we take family photos, and that was the look I gave when she threatened me with her look, like, you're in trouble if you don't smile. So my little grandson, I want to share you just a quick little video of him. He's got my mom's look, like when I got in trouble as a kid. Now, what's my granddaughter doing? I love her. I've watched that 1,000 times. So, things that get us in the moment. You know what I love about my daughter is she is so good at recognizing the little things. She's so in the moment. Right there, she'll notice these little beautiful breadcrumbs of life. And she appreciates it. I think that's so sweet. We had a moment, a clarion call to the present. This was a photo I took the moment my son was diagnosed with Duchenne. He was 3. And if you don't know, you will know soon that I take pictures of everything. And so this was one of those moments where I just immediately started taking pictures. And I was there, but I was also, this has a brain. It just does its own thing. So when I take camera pictures, but that was a moment that really took me off my feet. And we had to ask the doctor multiple times, what is this? And she told us 3 times before we finally understood it. So we had to figure out, how do we cope with this diagnosis that's almost impossible to really get our heads around. Here's a picture of Mitch and I. I apologize for the censor thing, but I had the biggest wedgie there ever was. It's a true story. It's an awful sight, but Mitchie wanted to sit on my shoulders to watch his younger sister walk over the fence. This was our first little house as newlyweds. Mitch is sitting on my shoulders. He wanted to see his sister walk to school. It happened to be the elementary school was just across the street in the backyard. And Mitch wanted to change his perspective, and he wanted to absorb what it was like to see his little sister go to school. And Mitch was my teacher. Ever since he was born, he taught me beautiful lessons. And I remember after that, Natalie took this picture of Mitch, and I was just holding his hands on my face and just trying to soak in the moment, because it was such a beautiful experience to see my son teach me to try to see the world through different eyes. He was such a cute boy, and I remember buying books. The internet didn't seem to have as much information about DMD back then, and so I'd buy these books that were meant for doctors that were not fun to read, but I traced Mitchell's hand in them, and I was just really trying to capture everything that was happening. So one of the difficulties with being in the present is our misunderstanding of time. Time is so unfamiliar to us, we have to wear wristwatches to remind us, okay? How often do we get lost in thought, or lost in conversation, or a movie, or an experience? Sometimes time can stretch out forever, and other times it goes by in a blink. Time is tricky. I think of my granddaughter. She's a year old. We just celebrated her first birthday about a month ago, and I love this little kid. She is my favorite. She is so beautiful inside and out. But it's weird to me that a year ago, when I look at pictures of her, she's virtually unrecognizable. And I'm astonished at how much of her life I've already forgotten about. And I'm a memorist. Like, I spend time documenting stuff, and I've forgotten how tiny she was. And now she's this beautiful, vibrant little child, emerging, and I'm so excited to get to know her emergent self. And my little grandboy, he's still a little tadpole, so I can't wait to meet him as he starts to awaken like my granddaughter. Yeah, I just took this photo 3 seconds ago. At least that's what it feels like. So I did a social experiment. A few years ago, a dear friend of mine, Kathy O'Grady, she lives in Boston. She follows my blog, and she came out during our first run to support our what we were trying to do. And I've since been great friends with her. And so she says, hey, I'm in town, let's go do something. So we go to the park, and we bought a bunch of toys, and we put stickers on them. It said, this is free, play with me. And so we started hiding them around the park. We just set them around everywhere. And here's a close-up. Please play with me. And so then these kids would come by and pick it up, and it was super cute. Here's the little boy in the green hat, sees a soccer ball just floating around. He picks it up, he sees the sticker. He's like, what? And he thought he had some loot. He takes it back to his dad. His dad puts his phone down, and then he starts playing with this child. It was so beautiful. Here's another picture of another kid kind of going, what goodness is it Christmas in July kind of thing. And all these kids are playing. What I love about this photo is the little boy in the front out of focus is also looking at the ball going, wow, I get to play. My favorite experience was with this sweet little girl. And she picked a baseball bat up with a ball, this invitation to play, and her mom started playing with her. And she was just kind of sitting in the back, not engaging. As we often do, right? We go to the park and we kind of sometimes rest a little bit, but we just saw this beautiful exchange between mother and daughter. And my friend Kathy was so touched by her sweetness. She's like, can I give you a hug? And, there was so much love in that moment, and what more could we ever hope for? That was an experience that changed me, and we've since done that a bit. We've gone to parks and left toys around for kids to play and take home. So the practice of being present can start with noticing the little things. Now, being present and hope and joy and happiness and a fulfilling life and a good future has everything to do with what happens right now. Showing up. I remember I did my best. I have lots of regrets. Thinking work was maybe just a little more important at times, where I would have done anything to get that time back and spend it with my kids. But I think that's the burden of all of us, right? We have to learn to practice selective neglect. Every once in a while, we'll have an emergency pop up, we got to take care of it. But as often as possible, I tried to be there. And I remember seeing Mitch at his school. We had like a little father-son lunch thing, and that was him seeing me as I was just walking in. It was so fun. Showing up, lingering a little longer, okay? I remember Natalie taking Mitch to school. And it was so cute because he was, I was like, hey, see you later, buddy. And I could have just got back on my phone or went back to my office and started working. But I decided to linger. And as Natalie was driving down the driveway, he turns around to see that I was there. And then my favorite photo is him looking through the window at me, kind of like, Dad. Linger a little longer. Sometimes we pass over moments so quickly because we're just moving on to the next thing. Linger and you'll have beautiful moments to cling to. Just 2 nights ago, Natalie and I were invited here to just go to a pool, just one of the 500 pools that are outside, and sit in the water and just talk to some families, and we were so grateful for that. And I saw one of the most beautiful things come out across my eye, at the corner of my eye. And I was talking to somebody, but I saw that, and so I finished my conversation, and then I went over and I realized, it's funny, when you get older, your eyes don't see as well in the dark. So I went over and I realized it was my dear friend, Tammy Kate, and her beautiful son, Seth. And here they are, just swimming in the water, and she's helping them fly through the water. I just thought that was such a beautiful moment. Making a moment magical is so beautiful, and it's a great way to practice being present. What can I do right now to make that amazing? Notice what our children notice. Mitch always had a tendency to notice the teeny tiny things, and in reality, they were the really big, big things. Inquire, ask questions, notice. Mitch and his older brother were at a theme park up in our area, and I noticed one time they were closing their eyes the whole ride. And I was like, what was that about, dude? And Mitch is all, well, if I close my eyes, it's a totally different experience. And I thought that was such a cool idea. So inquire, notice what our kids do, and tiny treasures, recognize the little things our kids collect. Put them in their bags, even our teenagers. I mean, the things, my son's, I have a 16-year-old at home now, and his room is not only a kind of a scrapbook for his life, but it's got breadcrumbs. It's a story that he's telling. Not real breadcrumbs and other metaphorical breadcrumbs. But stories hide in plain sight. Look for those, okay? And what I noticed with little Mitch is he'd have all these little things. He had a representation of our dog, of him with the backpack, me, and his mom, Buzz Lightyear, super strong. And so Mitchie, but he'd always carry in his backpack to school a little figurine of him and me, because he didn't see me as much as he saw his mom, which I think is often the case. What I've noticed is my sweet little granddaughter's doing that with her dad. She carries that guy, and my son-in-law has a mustache. He looks like Tom Selleck. You don't have to be close to be present. You don't have to be close to be present. What it means to a child when they're doing maybe their year-end concert or doing something where they're out playing a sport or just even in a room, and you just gaze over at them and smile and notice and recognize and give them you can be super beautiful. This was on Mitchell's Make-A-Wish, and Natalie was taking him up to go on a slide, and I was just like, hey, dude, because we kept taking turns, and he was always grateful that I would try to be present. Natalie, just yesterday, being present with our granddaughter on FaceTime, just again, you don't need to be close to be present. And another suggestion is don't just look, learn to see. I remember when we were between homes, we got the diagnosis, sold our house, built another one, just to better accommodate our son. And so we're in this apartment, and it was cramped and crowded, but the kids were out playing in a snowstorm, or just after a snowstorm. And, we looked, but then we went outside and we began to see the beauty that was right in front of us. So when my little son, Wyatt, was 4 years old, I remember taking him to bed. He was kind of being naughty. And I was like, hey, you got to go to bed. He's like, but I got to talk to you about monsters. I want you to hear this really quickly.
They like dogs.
They like dogs?
Yeah,
Oh, monsters?
yeah.
Oh,
You better keep the lights on.
how do you get rid of monsters?
But you push the freeze so they can not get you.
Oh,
That's how they scare them away. But if you turn on the lights and move, they will scare away.
they scare away? If you turn on the lights and move?
No, if you turn on the lights and move, guess what?
What?
All the monsters will get away and go in the house.
Yeah, I don't think there's such thing as monsters.
Yes, there is. Yes, there is.
I've never seen one.
I seen one when I was a baby.
I've never seen one, and I've been around a long time.
You seen one when I was a baby?
I've never seen a monster.
Yeah?
A Monsters Inc.
They ink. Guess what? When they ink, they die. I'm serious.
Okay, I believe you. I'm gonna stay here with you, okay? So go lay down. Okay, I love you. Good night.
You know, those little moments with our kids, taking the time to, we all have these magical phones now that record. They're simultaneously our greatest blessing, but also a curse. They distract us, but they can also help us capture moments. Let's talk about present moments when things get hard, and where does hope fit into all of this? Okay, so I've got one more thing I want to share about our past. We had a giant fire by our home a few years ago, and it was huge. It came within a couple hundred yards of our house. And I remember, it was pretty devastating, thinking that we were just gonna have to start over a little bit. And it was funny because our kids were rushing to go load our car with things that were valuable. And I have a weird thing about vinegar. I like to sip on it and drink it, and for real. And so Wyatt, my youngest, my 4-year-old's throwing the vinegar in the van, thinking that we gotta keep that, right? So it was cute. But, I remember my family had left and went far into, a safe zone, got in a hotel, and I was about to go. And I was taking pictures of our home. I was taking pictures of stuff, not because I cared about the stuff. I didn't care at all about it. Like, those things don't matter to me. But the arrangement of what they had, their little treasures, were telling stories to me. So I walked around the home and captured all the breadcrumbs, the little stories my kids left behind, because I didn't want to let that go. If at least I could remember those beautiful things. So, when we had the diagnosis, and then as things got more serious with our family and medically complicated, it was hard to be in the present moment. We were always thinking about the future. What about this? What about that? Maybe we should run to this. And it got a little complicated. And we'd go to doctor's appointments, and even though things were getting serious, I would go out of my way to try to be present with Mitch. And here I was not supposed to be in the room, but I was being naughty, peeking in, and he was laughing, and it made it a lot of fun to create those kind of memories. Mitch wanted to always, he goes, "Mom, can we play Flip the Bird?" And this is his game. He would love to just toss this bird back and forth. He had a funny sense of humor. He never swore, but he'd always say things that sounded like swears. So anyway, that was cute. But being present in the moment also was just really being there when our children were in the hospital and other places. And Mitch, he got sicker and sicker, and his heart, he had heart complications, and that's what ended up taking his life. And it was hard. I remember the day we rushed him to the ER, and it got pretty scary pretty fast. Here's a quick video in the cardiac intensive care unit where Mitchell's heart was pounding so much, his arm was bouncing. And I mentioned in the past, I remember it felt like a grown man was inside of his chest trying to punch his way out. I shot it again the next day thinking, am I seeing things right? And, but by this time I was weeping as I was filming this. So not only is he bouncing, my camera's moving because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was hard to be in the moment. But we had to figure out a way to separate ourselves from the fear of the future and be there, because that's the only place we can be. So we played Legos. This looks staged, but it is super real. Like Laura Ashley, my daughter, was just showing her funniest videos on YouTube, and we were just cracking up, and it was super cute. And always tried to make sure that Mitch got his love language, and for him it was touch. It was always just holding on to him and just, I'm here, buddy, I love you. We got home on hospice, and again, talk about how do you find hope when it seems that hope isn't there. But I learned that you can put hope in the future for sure, but the most effective thing for me to was put hope in the present moment. And this, my daughter took the sequence of Mitch, kind of we were cuddling, and then he gives me a kiss on the cheek, and I treasure these pictures. They're so special to me. There was a time I walked into Natalie's office, and he's playing Minecraft with his buddy Luke, and I remember saying, well, can I jump in? And if you don't know about Minecraft, does anybody not know about Minecraft? Yeah, it's fun, but it's like Legos that you don't have to step on in the middle of the night, and they last forever. So I saw Mitchell creating these beautiful things, these really cool ideas. He made this giant waterfall, and then they would like take a raft and go down it. I can go back into his kingdoms that he built, his Lego bases in Minecraft, forever. And I can go walk the halls of the things he created. I would suggest, if you have kids playing Minecraft or anything like it that they create, spend a minute, ask them to walk you around, get an account, go build with them, and you'll find that you'll learn something beautiful about your children when you do that. When he was, again, home on hospice, his buddies would come over and play Nerf battles. And Mitch had them sign a contract that they would man their station, And it was just so cute. That could have just been a piece of scrap paper that we just threw away, right? But we noticed it. We're like, this is so funny and cute. Being in the moment was really all we had, and we did our best to be there as we had to say a very terrible and awful goodbye to our boy. After Mitch had passed, I remember writing an essay entitled Walking on Jupiter, because to me it felt like Earth and all the pedantic things we're involved in on this planet didn't matter anymore. I felt like I was I was a ghost among strangers. I mentioned that the gravity of everything, like breathing was hard for years. I cried every day so hard that I felt like I had the flu. And everything felt heavy. It felt like Earth was a great way off. But even still, we had to find ways to be in the moment. Eckhart Tolle says, realize deeply that the present moment is all you will ever have. I used to hear that, and I was like, oh, okay, I think I get that. But now I get it, and it's different. I want to talk very briefly about what nurturing bamboo can teach us about hope and our future, okay, and being in the present moment. There's a kind of bamboo seed that it's really weird. It's different than most plants I've ever seen. If you plant it, you have to water it every day for 4 years, and it won't break the soil, okay? And then after the 4th year, all of a sudden it'll sprout, and it can grow up to 100 feet in a single month. How often do we live our lives contributing to a thing or trying to spend time going, is this making a difference? Is this working, And I think that a lot of times our investment in the present moment can feel like that sometimes because we're always anxious to get to the future. But I think that story of bamboo taught me that sometimes we don't see the fruits of our labors for a long time. When Mitch had passed, we were surrounded, immersed in an experience of grief. And it became very difficult for us to process the pain and try to be in the moment at the same time. How do you heal your worried heart when you feel like yourself are drowning? But then, I would notice these moments with my kids, and I would just try to drop into it. Yes, grief is out there, and we had to worry about other things that were coming or whatever, but we tried to be in the moment because that moment was all we really had. Here's an experience where it was about 1.5 years, 2 years after Mitch had passed. We were up seeing Natalie's parents in October, and I was just trying to film Natalie running. And this is Ethan photobombing. And again, I'm just putting some context here because You know, when we're wrapped up in grief, we sometimes just want to fall into a closet and cry our hearts out. But we had to keep going out of that closet to live life. This is an example. So the point of that, and I'll get to the real point here and all this in just a second. The point of that was that we were in deep existential pain, but we still found moments to jump into the moment and try to be present with our kids. That's so important. The paradox, let's talk about the paradox. The deepest learning you will ever have in your life will happen in the paradox, okay? I wrote an essay years ago called I'm Okay, but I'm Not Okay, and That's Okay. And it was a story about how I was grieving, I was writing. My son Ethan comes into my office to talk to me, and I'm just a wreck. He's like, "Are you okay, Dad?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I just got like a boulder in my eye. You know, I was trying to be tough." And then I thought to myself, "Oh, I'm not helping my son be real. Like, I don't have time for things that aren't real." So I said, "Son, I'm okay, but I'm not okay." And that, did you know what I mean? And he kind of had this look of relief wash over his face. He's like, "Oh, I know what you mean." And he learned that it's okay to be two things at once, to be in pain, but also feel joy or whatever. And let's talk about some paradoxes, okay? If you want to learn deep patience, spend time with somebody that deeply annoys you, okay? There's a paradox. You sit in that, you'll learn. Empathy, if you want to have real deep empathy, you must suffer. If you want to understand forgiveness, look to the person who most hurt you. That can be the work of a lifetime, but it's worth it. Rumi taught this. I love Rumi. He said, "What hurts you blesses you." That seems so counterintuitive, so paradoxical, but it's so deeply true. Healing hurts. Sometimes we think hurting isn't, we got to not hurt, but you know, Rumi also taught that, you know, the cure to pain is the pain. We've got to experience it. Hope for the future in the present moment, that seems like a paradox. How do I have hope for the future and be in the present moment? What does that mean? And that's what I'm trying to talk about. My most beautiful moments in my life were the things that were deep in the paradox of love and pain, you know, suffering and healing. Eckhart Tolle said this: for most people, their spiritual teacher is their suffering, because eventually suffering brings about awakening. You know, our bodies are a lot alike about our souls, what goes on inside our minds and hearts. We go through awakenings and going back to sleep. How often in life do we look back and go, I was totally asleep at the wheel. I wasn't even there. He's encouraging us to look at our suffering as a way to stay awake, to recognize the things that matter most. So I want to share some closing thoughts in a video that I put together for this audience and this topic. You remember this guy I showed on the front? You know, he is a philosopher, he's a comedian, and he's very funny. I reached out to him yesterday. He's got millions of people that follow him. And I just thought I would be like, hey, I love you. Would you send me a video that I can share with this audience? And he immediately was like, I would be honored to. And but it turned out that he's traveling, and we just couldn't make it work in time for today's talk. But he was very empathetic to, you know, the hardship everyone faces. And I explained a little bit about our son and DMD, but he wanted to extend his condolences. He lost a child about 22 years ago and is no stranger to suffering. It's interesting about when I think about my hope for the future, okay, and my recognition of the past, remember that metaphor of looking forward and back as part of living a balanced, healthy life? The things that I grieve, the things I wish I had, were those ordinary moments, the things that were hiding in plain sight. I don't care about Disneyland. I care about kitchen table conversations, hanging out, watching movies, playing games, all the things that we just love to do ordinarily. And this, I remember, was a day all the kids had their bath, and You know, their heads still smell like fresh shampoo, and they were all clean and sparkly, and we're like, let's go ride a bike. And those, I would do anything to have that. So if that's what I want in my past, why wouldn't I want that in my future? The only thing I can do right now is today. I can do this right now. And I think that draws me to the point. I have 3 beautiful women in my life: my wife, my daughter, and my mother. And they each teach me about grace and about what it means to be loving and service-oriented. My future will be beautiful. I know this. This is me now. My future will be beautiful because my present is. I choose to make today beautiful. I hope to make memories that are worth keeping today. And that guarantees that my future, because right now was yesterday's future. Does that make sense? Kind of sounds weird, but that's what it is. I'm going to make 3 invitations today as I wrap up. The first invitation is to be aware of what you think about. Think about what you think about. Jill Castle, was talking about cognitive behavioral therapy as a means of, thought stopping and kind of going, okay, well, wait, is this serving me? Is the way I'm thinking, am I aware of how I'm thinking? Look her up and all the things she teaches. It's brilliant. But think about what you think about. The next invitation is be clear and present in the moment. It'll take time sometimes. You'll do things you think, is this even making a difference? But it will. You'll look back. Your future is soon your now, and your now becomes your past. And if you want that to be beautiful, you've got to focus on today. And then embrace the paradox. I invite you to embrace the paradox. Get used to feeling uncomfortable. And learn and listen and watch and hear and see. So I want to share this video.
I always wondered how to find hope when I felt lost at sea.
So my son is Mitchell Jones, and he was diagnosed with cardiomyopathy, and our doctor is Dr. Williams. And he has been vomiting and has a severe headache that just won't go away.
And just like that, we found ourselves in the very place we didn't want to be. Immersed in grief, trapped in time. Longing for all that was and wishing for everything to remain the same. How were we to find hope in a time of so much darkness? When grief and time seems to stretch out like a dull blade. And how would we know if we were healing? This was when we began the deepest work of our lives. Slowly, we began to see the world through different eyes. I realized that each moment I spent with my kids wasn't just a gift to them. It turns out it was just as much a gift to me. Sometimes, I wonder who was raising who. My children taught me that a life worth living doesn't cost money, only time and attention. They showed me that life is fragile and how to take care of the only body I will ever own. I saw what bravery looks like. That love is a verb. I witnessed how burdens turn out to be our greatest blessings, and that kindness is contagious. I saw what it really looks like to have someone's back, and that our glass can feel overflowing even when it's almost empty. Perhaps what I learned most is there's magic in the most simple moments. Just before Mitch went to the hospital, we sensed time was short, so we focused on the present moment and we took our kids sleigh riding. And this is a memory I will not soon forget. I discovered this day that moments are worth more than all the money on earth. I'll never forget how my youngest son threw his arms in the air, so excited, so young and free. A few months later, the same boy had to grapple with loss. I worried about Wyatt and his future, for he was so young to carry such burdens. But we did our best to fill his life with meaning and purpose. Fast forward just a few short years, and I'm living in the very future I worried so much about. Wyatt is a remarkable young man, deep, complex, eternally curious. Oh, and there's my grandkids. I never saw that one coming. I have never known such a love as this, such a joy. As hard as life has been, I wouldn't trade it for anything. Even when life seemed darkest and my hope stretched out even to infinity, my greatest hope was to make each moment count. Among the gifts my struggle has given me, it's clarity. To live more completely, divinely, and passionately in the present, for that is all I've ever had or ever will. As I sit in the paradox of my grief and love, I find my deepest joys. I've learned not to run from my pain, but to sit with it, and it is there where I experienced my deepest learning. Life, it turns out, is a delicate dance of hoping, hurting, and healing. And I think I finally come to understand that the future I hope for will be beautiful because I choose to make today beautiful. And that is where I put my hope.
So in closing, I just want to share that though we might hope for outcomes in the future, if you put your hope in today, certainly look forward to the future, plan, prepare, make preparations, do all the things, but you don't live there and you can't get there until this moment, right? So I hope that some of these ideas were helpful, that you might have taken an idea or two that you can apply in your life, because as you put your hope in the present moment, your future will be beautiful regardless of whether we suffer or experience joy. It's all there for us if we give the present moment everything we've got. Thank you for your time.